All right, guys, welcome to this week's Corn Belt Umpires Zoom Lunch Clinic. I talked to Mark Zalma yesterday. We discussed potential topics, and I guess over this past weekend, we had some issues with bench jockeying. So we're going to discuss bench jockeying today. What is bench jockeying? How do we identify it? And things of that nature. I guess I will say that you don't have to deal with bench jockeying a lot at the lower levels, but it does happen. And what a lot of people may think as, oh, that's just baseball talk, is actually bench jockeying, and we as umpires need to address it. Just a couple rules and expectations. If you got questions, throw them in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to just unmute, and at an appropriate time, just feel free to ask your question. Everybody knows or should know my theory on stupid questions, which is that there is actually such a thing as a stupid question. It's the one that you don't ask and it comes back to bite you. So I will, I got my email and my contact information here at the bottom, as well as Connor's, who I don't believe is joining us today. But if you have questions, comments, suggestions for future clinics, we want to hear from you. This handling situations, ejections, things like that is always a real requested topic. We try to hit this probably once a year or so, and then loop it in as we can. Jesse, have we had a lot of ejections this year so far in South Dakota? I mean, I know of, I think, 2.
Off the top of my head, I'd say maybe 10, something like that. Dane did tell me the other day he says it's a record number of rejections. However, I told him, it says, well, that could be skewed because this is really the first year we've really pushed the reporting. Yep. So, take it for what it's worth. Was it? Is it a little of both? I'd say, yeah, probably.
Well, I can tell you just from our local association of the state, we keep track of that at a local level as well, and provide feedback as well. So if you have an ejection and you're working for our local association, we want to hear about it too, because we want to help provide feedback with that type of stuff. So we'll move on to start kind of just discussing what bench jockeying is. So my general rule of thumb when it comes to bench jockeying, you cheer for your own teammates. You don't talk to the other team. So I always just tell guys, hey, if I'm going to address it, I just say, without getting into warnings and stuff like that, I just look over at the dugout and just say, hey, make sure you're talking to your teammates. It's a great way to just kind of refocus without having to be that guy, so to speak, right away. And it's a great way to try to give them a little bit of slack. And if it does escalate, you can already say, look, I told them to cheer for their teammates only, and we can move up the progression ladder accordingly. Bench jockeying is verbal, unsportsmanlike conduct. It is basically chirping that is directed at the opposing team. That's really the best definition of bench jockeying that I can give. And I emphasize this: cheer for your teammates only. I don't know if Dan or Terry or anybody else has a better definition of bench jockeying, but that's kind of the general gist of it that I can provide.
The only thing I'd add, Jake, is if something is planned and organized, it's problematic. So Russ, for example, a couple of years ago had kids that were modifying bats to look like rifles, and there were 2 or 3 of them laying on the ground pretending to shoot at opposing players. That is bench jockeying. It falls under that category. So if you want to get bench jockeying, to me means more than one player, and we're going to get a collective warning or a collective set of ejections if it gets to the real, grenade tossing. But if it's coordinated, if it's planned, if it's got more than one person involved, then you're on the bench, not just one.
Absolutely. I think the rifle, absolutely. You see the Powerade Cup radar guns that say slow on it. I would say that's another form of bench jacking, right along the lines of what Dan is saying. And frankly, as far as the coordinated act, that's probably the big one that I see most frequently that I have to address. So it's important that we know what bench jacking is and what is not bench jacking. I quickly jotted down 3 comments that I hear frequently on the field. Never twice, after a pickoff move. That's not, in my mind, that's not bench jacking. One, that's usually, a hint, tip, trick, advice for their teammate who's on base. As I said on the slide before, we want players to cheer for their own teammates, not talk to the other team. Same with best move. It's the exact same concept. Nice work, 15. If 15 is the pitcher, yeah, that would be bench jacking. I can remember a couple years ago, we had a couple pitches get thrown to the backstop, and someone yelled out of the dugout, get it under control, Ricky, or something like that. Well, okay, that's directed right at the pitcher. He was trying to make a major league joke, and that was directed right at the pitcher. So we stepped in and just, hey, can't, cheer for your teammates. And that shut it down. As we'll discuss in future slides, the ability to address bench jockeying, we have a lot of latitude in ways we can address it. And so it's not something where you have to go right away to a warning. There's a lot of different techniques and tools that we can use in our toolkit to address it before we get to the formal warnings. So most people should be familiar with this: ignore, acknowledge, warn, eject. Well, that's not how we handle bench jacking, because we don't ignore. If you ignore bench jacking, it will escalate, because as soon as one team does it, the other team's going to do it, and then in the blink of an eye, you can have a beanball war breakout. And so at the first moment that we hear any comments that are related to bench jockeying, acknowledge it. Now this is not me saying, oh, have rabbit ears about it, but don't miss a comment that is bench jockeying, and pay attention to what's going on in the dugouts, because if we're able to catch bench jockeying early on, we can put out a lot of fires before they even start. Discuss with the coach if appropriate. At a college game last year that I was working, and these two teams, they're, I don't know, 30 miles apart. They see each other all the time. Their JV squads play probably once every other week. And the home team, my recollection is, or the visiting team, was starting to get a little lippy at the home team's pitcher. And I put my hand up and I said something to the dugout. Last pitch of the inning, it was still continuing, and I mean, we're close to the end of the inning. I say something, it stops for a couple pitches. Last pitch of the inning, they say something. I don't remember what it was, but so what I did in that situation is grab my lineup card. Using your lineup card is a great way to communicate with coaches without making it look like they're communicating with coaches. And so I pulled the manager out of the dugout and I just said, hey, I'm hearing stuff out of your dugout. I've already said, hey, let's knock it off. Take care of this for me, please, before I have to take care of it. And he said, yep, absolutely, will do. And you can't make this up, because about 20 seconds later, after I tell players we got 2 pitches left, the home coach comes up and says something to me about it. And I said, yep, I already took care of it. So-and-so is working on it. And coach was just fine with that. If that still doesn't stop it, then we're going to issue a warning. And it's not just a warning to, say, 56. It is the entire team and coaching staff that get the bench jockeying warning. So the next player to say something that is considered, or say something or engage in conduct that is bench jockeying in nature, is ejected. After you have issued the warning, if you hear it, eject and let Jesse know about it, as well as Mark or myself if you're working for our local association, because we want to talk about, we want to know what the circumstances were. We want to know what you did, because I can tell you that even at the college level, I had an ejection last year, and I called and spent probably half hour with Dan on the phone, talking through it. And in the preceding weeks, we're gonna be talking about handling situations, and it's a great, it was a good ejection, but there's a lot of things that I could have done differently that probably would have prevented the ejection. And so, we want to talk about those things, because it's not an ejection is not another notch in the gun belt, to use an old adage like that. An ejection occurs when players or coaches engage in conduct that is so detrimental to the game that they remove themselves. Mike, great question. I'm going to save that question here for about 3 minutes, because we're going to talk about that on the next slide, I believe. So so when you have an ejection, we want to know about it, because, there might have been a better situation where, hey, you could have given the warning here, or maybe you didn't give a warning, and I want to know why a warning wasn't given. If it's a high school game, I want to know if restriction ever crossed your mind, or why you didn't restrict, or even if you did. There's just a lot of things that go into an ejection, and nobody wants to get the quote red ass title, but you have to eject. And when you work a lot of games, ejections happen. Write it up, move on, but learn from it. It's important to not miss an ejection, but we want to train and try to, if we can prevent an ejection from happening, that's what we want to do. So let us know if you have an ejection, just because we want to help, and see if there, maybe there was a better way we could have handled it, or something like that. Dan, Terry, anybody else, any thoughts?
No, that's exactly right. Until you talk it through with someone who's been around as long as a Terry Helgett, who can give you sort of different tools and different options, you may go too quickly to the ejection. We do want them to finish the game. We don't want to write reports if we don't have to, and we don't praise each other anymore for number of ejections. So I wholeheartedly concur. If you do have an ejection, and it's sometimes nice to hear from a senior guy say, "There's no choice. You couldn't save that guy, so you did it right," and that matters too. That makes you feel pretty good about it. So always check in.
I mean, don't go looking for them. I mean, sometimes you just gotta, it's kind of like you know it when you hear it kind of thing, kind of like pornography, the old definition of it. Bench jockeying, to me, that's what it is. I'm going to let them say a few things. If it's in good nature and nobody's really taking offense to it, I'm staying out of it. To be quite honest, I'm just staying out of it. But yeah, when it escalates, then then you start, like Jacob said, you talk to the coach first, see if he'll handle it. In most cases, it takes care of it and you're done.
I can say I don't think I've ever had a situation where a coach, if I say, hey, this is going on, fix it, please, they won't fix it. This is such a, they want to keep their players in the game, or at least eligible to participate in the game. And so we want to make sure that we go through the proper steps, especially in a bench jockeying situation, because there's so much that we can do to prevent stuff from escalating. We have so many tools in our toolkit that we can use to, whether it be diffuse a situation, warnings, things like that, where we can try to keep players in the game, so to speak. Any other questions as far as kind of handling bench jockeying with, acknowledging it, discussing, warning, and if necessary, ejection?
No, you're right on, Jake, because like you said, if you get the coach involved, like you and I had an instance here a few weeks ago where just mentioned to the head coach in between innings that, hey, we got to get your guys to stop yelling at the first baseman because he dropped a foul pop-up. And they kind of wrote him a little bit about it. And he went over there and, he handled it. He was kind of loud and got in their face, and there wasn't other words said out of that dugout the rest of the day because they want to keep their guys eligible, like you said.
After this call, I have a list of 3 coaches who this might be. I might ask you about that because there's like 3 guys that come to mind right away. So we'll move on here. So tips for handling bench jockeying. I said, my usual go-to is, hey, remember, we're talking to our teammates here. Or just, hey, talk to your teammates, and whatnot. As far as identifying bench jockeying, I love Terry's comment, and mainly that's because I'm a law student. And there's this really old criminal case, and unfortunately Dan's left already, but it talks about the Fourth Amendment warrant requirement. And the great Justice Potter Stewart says, well, I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. And so, for me to sit here and say, oh, this is bench jockeying, this is not bench jockeying, you got to do it. It's not just something that you can teach. You got to do it. You got to screw it up and learn from it. You learn so much more from screwing stuff up than anything else, really. So Mike had a question that he put in the chat, which is, what if you hear it after you've worn the bench but don't know who said it? There's a couple options that I have that I use, where if we get to this point, and I wish Dan and Dan was still here and or Russ was able to join us as well. But as far as identifying offenders, you can give the coach the options, like, look, somebody's getting run for this, and I'll let you pick. And if you don't want to pick, I'm going to pick. And you're not going to like who I pick. I use that in hockey a lot. When I have to hand out like a bench minor penalty or something like that, like I'm going to go take probably the captain. The other option is if it's a, Jay, exactly. Telling a coach to nip it in the bud. Absolutely. That's why we want to talk to the coaches first rather than just giving the warning right away. Because in certain rule sets, if you give a warning, the coach is going with if you have to eject. And so talking to coaches and trying to nip it in the bud is a huge goal, I guess. If you're working a double header, okay, and you're working at a level where where they're gonna have to serve a game. I would try to find a player that's no longer eligible to play in the game. So you have someone that was a starter, they were removed, they were re-entered, and then they were removed again. That's an option. I know some people that they would find, they'd ask the coach, hey, who pitched yesterday? If you're working at like the Legion level where you have more, you got one kid that's going to just pitch. They're not going to let him hit. They're not going to let him do anything else, but he pitched yesterday and he's at his pitch count limit for, the next 3 days. I'm going to run him. He's not playing the next game. He's probably in street clothes or, not in true uniform. I'd run him because you're making an example and you're saying, all right, we'll run people. But you're not, you're nipping it in the bud by ejecting, but you're not, putting the team at a real disadvantage. That's an option as well. And yeah, at the end of the day, if you don't know, you got to go get somebody. That's just the way it is. So pick who you think did it. And some other people may say differently. But I would just, go with your best guess and write it up in the report. And if they want to sit and say, oh, no, it wasn't 28, it was 23 that did it, let them. There's in the major leagues, the athletic trainer will get run for stuff. It's more to just say, all right, hey, we're not doing this anymore. And, we'll start throwing people out. So yeah, that's a great question. The other part I would say with identifying offenders, talk to your partners. Your partners, might have seen, whose lips were moving. If I hear something and I already have a bench jockeying warning out and I hear something, I'm going to be looking to see whose lips are moving. I just want to know, because then if I hear that, we have bench jockeying again, then I'm going to go and address it, which is not fun because that involves paperwork. But I will add, go get the bench jockeying ejection if you have to. Don't ever shy away from an ejection because of paperwork. The paperwork, if it's a routine run-of-the-mill ejection, the paperwork's going to take no more than 10 minutes. And at some point in time, we might do a mini clinic on, how do you write an ejection report? But the reason that we don't want to just, ignore it because, we don't want to do paperwork is, if you ignore an ejection, you have now set a precedent that this conduct is okay. Jason, can I use your first college baseball game as an example from last year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. So I was working a doubleheader on Friday at a unnamed school. And the home team and visiting team were just chirping back and forth the entire game, about third inning on. And, we did the informal stuff that we could do to try to nip it in the bud. And, we handed out necessary warnings. And then it got to the point where it's like, okay, everybody on this field has a warning now, and we're not going to put up with it. 2 innings later, catcher says something to me that you cannot say to an umpire, and it will not be repeated. So I run the catcher. I have no other choice. He already has a warning for other conduct. So I run the catcher. Well, it was one of those games where you knew no matter what you did, there was going to be an ejection. You have those games when you've done 1,000+ games, you know what's coming. And you kind of have a sixth sense about it. And so, we got through that game. The second game of that doubleheader, you could have heard a mouse fart out there. There was no talking between the dugouts. it cleaned it up. Well, one, had we not ejected, we set a bad precedent. We say that this type of conduct is okay and nothing, we're not going to do anything about it. The next day, Jason comes in, he's working his first game in that conference. If my partner and I don't handle that stuff right then and there during that doubleheader, what we have just said is this conduct is okay. And Jason, good luck, buddy. You get to deal with this tomorrow. Well, that's not how this works. I remember I was sitting at a football clinic a couple years ago, and this was when the NFHS really got on officials about enforcing things like knee pads, shoulder pads being covered, things like that. The worst thing that you can do as a football crew would be to not enforce it, and then the next crew comes in and they enforce it, and we all know what the coach is going to say. Well, the crew last week didn't enforce it, and now we're going to enforce it this week, and you're setting the next crew up at a disadvantage. And so don't shy away from dealing with bench jockeying, ejections, because, I got to do paperwork. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're saying this conduct's okay. And then, if I come in and I start dealing with it by the rule book, I'm going to have this question, they're going to say, the guys we had last week didn't do anything about it. And so that's not being a good official, because you have to, I'm leaving a mess for the next crew. Now, Jason, do you remember the phone conversation that you and I had after your first game in that conference as I was on my way home from my next game?
Yeah, I gave you a call and said I had absolutely no issues whatsoever, because you guys cleaned it up and took care of it for me. Actually, it started out after the national anthem. We had to run the guys off the line because they were trying to do the old who could stand on here the longest, and we went out and barked at them. And that was the only thing I had to say all day long, because they went, oh, yesterday we messed around and somebody got tossed. We're not going to push these guys. So it was awesome. So you set me up for a lot easier day, and I appreciate that.
It's probably the easiest college game you've ever worked in your life, right?
100%, yes.
If every umpire has the same philosophy and manages the rule book, or manages the game the way the rule book demands, a lot of these issues that we have with parents, coaches, and players, running their mouths at umpires doesn't happen. We as umpires can easily clean a lot of this up, but it would take, it takes the commitment of everybody to enforce the rule book the same way. And the, at the college level, it's really nice because we have really clear-cut guidelines as far as what is acceptable conduct and what is not acceptable conduct. The NFHS book is a little bit murkier on that, but at the end of the day, remember, if it's NFHS, the H and S stands for high school, is a scholastic event. When I'm doing captains meetings for if I'm reffing high school hockey in Minnesota, I always tell kids, this is an extension of the classroom. If you wouldn't say this in front of your teacher, don't say it out here, because the purpose of scholastic sports is education. And so if you treat the baseball field, the basketball court, whatever, as an extension of the classroom, and you enforce unsportsmanlike conduct the same way that a teacher would enforce it in the classroom, you're already moving in the right direction. Any questions, comments so far? Cool. All right. I think I might have one more slide. Nope, I don't. I'll stop this share here. So as far as, other bench jockeying stuff goes, if you hand warnings out, and just kind of warnings in general, make it known that there's a warning. But then also, we talked, I think in an earlier clinic this year, about when is an appropriate time to get together with a partner during a game. If I'm working with Jason and we're working a 9-inning college game, we get done with the national anthem, I give him a fist bump, I punch him in the chest, and I say, I'll see you in 9 innings. Or 7 innings. No, I'm not one to get together unless we absolutely have to. And I will tell you that if we have warnings that are being handed out, especially for something like bench jockeying, we need the entire umpire crew, whether it be a 2-umpire system, 3 or 4, everybody on that crew needs to be on the same page with who has warnings, what was the warning for, and if we know who the offender was, so that get together with your partner, discuss, hey, this is what we got a warning for, home dugout's got a warning for bench jockeying, this is what it was. Okay, cool. And then the base umpire or, the rest of the crew needs to be aware of, hey, we have already had stuff going on this game. Be aware of it. But, as Terry mentioned earlier, don't go looking for it, but don't miss it either. Any other comments, questions, or anything like that? All right, so I see none. And so we will end the meeting early. And next week, I think we're probably gonna be talking more handling situation type stuff. How do you deal with ejections, arguments, in crew communication when handling a situation. We got a lot of videos coming up. I've clipped a ton of videos from the college season, and there's a ton of great videos out there that we have to use, and we'll discuss a lot of situation handling stuff. I'm going to stop the recording right now, but I will say that if people have other questions that they may not have wanted to ask while we were recording, or they just have, hey, I had a weird play last night that I want to talk through it and see if I got it right. Stick around. I'll be here for another 15, 20 minutes or until everybody leaves, and more than willing to answer any questions. So I'll stop the video right now.